Bienvenido a Sombras del crepúsculo. Cuando la luz se desvanece y la penumbra toma el control, las sombras se alargan, cobrando vida propia y revelando historias escalofriantes que permanecen ocultas durante el día. Aquí, en la delgada línea entre la luz y la oscuridad, cada relato trae consigo horrores que estremecen el alma, enigmas irresolubles y terrores capaces de paralizar incluso a los más valientes. La noche te abraza, seductora pero mortal, y no permitirá que abandones este lugar sin antes enfrentar tus peores pesadillas. His eyes caught fleetingly in the rearview mirror's silvered glance were the precise moment the world fractured. Not the gaze of Samaritan kindness I desperately hoped for, but the flat ancient stare of a hunter closing on startled quarry. And I, ensnared on this desolate ribbon of asphalt, miles sculpted from indifference, was utterly exposed. It began as an escape velocity dream, a cross-country pilgrimage toward a nascent career, the vehicle crammed with the totems of my former life. The highway unfurled, a promise whispered on the wind, an adventure painted in the broad strokes of boundless horizons. Until somewhere deep in the yawning wheat-sea expanse of Kansas, my car began its discordant percussion. Hours had dissolved under the wheels, the landscape a relentless panorama of golden grain beneath a sky stretched taut and vacant. Sunset bled across the western edge, a violent palette of orange and rose, just as the first unsettling rhythm began beneath me. A subtle tremor at first, nearly lost to the engine's drone and the radio's tinny cheer. But mile followed silent mile, and the vibration intensified, grew insistent, a frantic metal heartbeat. Denial warred with rising nausea. My schedule was unforgiving, the specter of delay a cold fist clenching in my gut. Yet when tendrils of acrid white smoke began to writhe from beneath the hood like escaping specters, denial became an unaffordable luxury. A low curse escaped my lips as I coaxed the shuddering machine onto the gravel shoulder. The rhythmic disturbance had escalated to a violent clatter before the engine offered a final sputtering gasp and surrendered to silence. Perfect. Just utterly perfect. Exiting the car, I waved a hand through the biting fumes after wrestling the hood open. Mechanical intricacies were a foreign language, but the scene before me, a tangled geography of hoses and blistered metal, screamed catastrophe. This was leagues beyond my meager understanding. Defeated, I reached for my phone. Predictably, the screen displayed only mocking emptiness. No bars, no lifeline. The sun had plunged below the horizon, its lingering glow swiftly devoured by an encroaching twilight that thickened the air. In this deepening gloom, the vacant highway shed its peaceful facade, morphing into something vast and vaguely menacing. A tremor ran through me, unrelated to the cooling evening air. Then, twin beacons pierced the gloaming. Headlights, approaching steadily. A surge of adrenaline, this time laced with hope, jolted through me. Perhaps calamity could yet be averted. I flagged frantically, relief washing over me in a dizzying wave as the vehicle, an old dented pickup truck, decelerated and pulled onto the shoulder behind my stricken car. A figure emerged, broad-shouldered and tall, silhouetted against the fading light. A rough beard shadowed his jawline. A worn baseball cap sat low on his brow. He ambled closer, offering a smile that seemed practiced, easy. Bit of trouble. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble. I nodded, gesturing with a helpless sweep of my hand towards the still-smoking engine bay. It just gave up on me. I don't suppose you're mechanically inclined? A short chuckle. Know my way around an engine, maybe. Mind if I have a look-see? Stepping back, I watched him lean into the metallic guts of my car, He poked, prodded, his murmurs swallowed by the immense quiet. After a few moments that stretched taut, he straightened, wiping greasy hands on faded denim. "Well," he began, "it ain't terminal. That's the upside." He paused. "Downside is, you need a part I haven't got handy. There's a town, maybe 30 miles up the road. Got a garage there. I could run you up if you'd like." Hesitation coiled cold and sharp in my stomach. Every cautionary tale, every parental warning screamed against accepting a ride from a stranger on a forsaken highway at dusk. But the alternative? Stranded here, vulnerable, with no guarantee of another vehicle passing before dawn. That would be incredible, thank you," I managed, injecting a confidence I didn't possess into my voice. "I really owe you one." He smiled again, but this time, a flicker in his eyes, something unsettling pricked at my skin. "Glad to be of service. Grab your essentials. Hop on in." I retrieved my purse and phone, locking the car out of sheer pointless habit. He was already behind the wheel, the truck's engine idling with a rough cadence. I climbed into the passenger seat, the ancient springs groaning a weary protest. "Name's Silas," he offered, easing the truck back onto the asphalt ribbon. "Ilara," I replied, fumbling with the seatbelt buckle. "Thank you again, Silas. Seriously, I don't know what I would have done." Silas merely nodded, his gaze fixed forward. "Can be treacherous out here," he observed, his tone neutral, yet somehow weighted. "Especially for a young woman traveling solo. Never know who you might cross paths with." Something in that cadence made my head snap towards him. His profile was etched in shadow, but the faint glow from the dashboard illuminated the ghost of a smile touching his lips. It held no warmth. An unnerving silence descended, thick and palpable. I yearned for the radio's static, any sound to rupture the mounting tension. But only the hum of tires on pavement and the frantic thrumming of my own heart filled the cab. "So," I ventured, the word feeling flimsy in the heavy air, "are you from around here?" Silas shook his head slowly. "Nope, just passing through. Same as you." "Oh, where are you headed?" He turned his head then, fully facing me. In the eerie viridian luminescence of the dashboard instruments, his eyes seemed to gleam with a dark, consuming hunger. "Wherever the road decides to take me." Ice traced a path down my vertebrae. I averted my gaze, feigning interest in the impenetrable blackness outside the window. No lights, no structures, no sign of human existence marred the void. We might have been the last two souls adrift in an empty cosmos. It was then, with a jolt that felt physical, that I saw it. The odometer. We'd been driving for what felt like a significant stretch. 20 minutes, maybe more. Yet the numbers remained stubbornly fixed, unchanged from when I'd first climbed in. We weren't progressing towards any town. We were tracing patterns in the dark. Silas," I began, my voice betraying a slight tremor. "I think maybe we missed a turn. Shouldn't we be nearing that town by now?" He offered no reply, merely continued driving, that faint, disquieting smile still playing on his lips. "Silas," I repeated louder, forcing firmness into my tone. "Did you hear me? We need to turn back." With a swift, economical motion, he reached across the console. The click of the central locking mechanism engaging echoed like a gunshot in the confined space. "Now, Ilara," he murmured, his voice dropping, acquiring a silken, menacing quality. "Why on earth would I want to do that? We're only just beginning to get acquainted." Panic, Cold and absolute surged through me, a suffocating tide. This wasn't real. This was the plot of a cheap thriller, a grim fable whispered to frightened travelers. This didn't happen, not to me. But the undeniable reality pressed in, heavy and suffocating, and a terrifying certainty crystallized. If I didn't act, right now, the coming dawn was not guaranteed. My eyes darted frantically around the dim cab, searching for leverage, a weapon, anything. My purse lay at my feet. Inside, nestled amongst the usual detritus, was the small canister of pepper spray my mother had insisted I carry. Could I reach it? Could I deploy it before he reacted? "You know," Silas mused, his tone chillingly conversational, as if reminiscing with an old friend. "I've driven this particular stretch for years. It's remarkable how many pretty young things find themselves in need of a hand out here. Always so appreciative, so trusting." I forced myself into a semblance of calm, needing to keep him talking while my hand crept downwards, inch by agonizing inch, towards the purse. And what became of them? The question felt like swallowing glass, but distraction was my only currency. He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound that scraped along my nerves. "Oh, they're still around, in a manner of speaking, scattered across these fields you see, nourishing the wheat that feeds this great nation. There's a certain poetry to it. Wouldn't you agree?" My fingers finally closed around the cool metal of the canister. A deep, steadying breath. I braced myself. "You know what I think?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. He turned towards me, one eyebrow slightly raised. "What might that be, sweetheart?" In a single fluid, desperate motion, I brought the canister up and unleashed its entire caustic payload directly into his face. Silas roared, a sound of pure agony and fury, instinctively clawing at his eyes as the truck swerved violently. I slammed against the dashboard, the world dissolving into a blur as we bucked and jolted off the highway, crashing over uneven terrain before lurching to a bone-jarring halt. No hesitation, no second thought. I fumbled with the door lock, threw it open, and flung myself out into the night, hitting the rough ground with bruising force. Pain flared in my shoulder, but raw adrenaline surged, lifting me, propelling me forward. I ran. I ran with a desperation I hadn't known I possessed, lungs searing, heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Behind me I could hear Silas's enraged shouts, threats that painted horrifying images in the darkness, but I didn't dare look back. I just ran. Time lost all meaning. It could have been minutes or an eternity. My legs burned with lactic acid, each breath a tearing agony in my chest. But fear was a relentless engine, pushing me beyond exhaustion, beyond the limits of my endurance. Then, finally, blessedly, a glimmer in the distance, the artificial glow of a gas station, its fluorescent lights a fragile beacon in the overwhelming blackness. Hope surged, lending impossible strength to my failing limbs. I stumbled towards it, the sight of parked cars, of illuminated windows, of human presence, triggering a wave of near-hysterical relief. I burst through the glass door, causing the lone sleepy-eyed attendant to jump. "Please," I choked out, the words ragged, torn from my throat. "Call the police. A man, he tried to—" The sentence fragmented, unfinished. The adrenaline dam finally broke, and the crushing weight of what had nearly transpired slammed into me. My legs buckled, and I collapsed onto the cool linoleum, consumed by racking sobs, shaking uncontrollably. The subsequent hours swam by in a disorienting haze. Sirens wailed, uniforms appeared, questions were asked, my fragmented story painstakingly recorded. They located my abandoned car, towed it to a local garage. Of Silas and his battered pickup, there was no trace. They assured me the search would continue, but the grim set of their jaws spoke volumes about their expectations. As the first tentative fingers of dawn painted the eastern sky, I found myself in a small-town diner, cradling a mug of coffee long gone cold. I was alive. Bruised, terrified, but undeniably alive. I had survived. Yet the world felt irrevocably altered. The open road, once a symbol of liberation and boundless potential, now seemed laced with latent menace. Every unknown face held the potential for darkness. But alongside the fear, a different awareness had taken root. In the crucible of terror, I had discovered a resilience I never knew resided within me. Faced with the unimaginable, I hadn't frozen. I had fought. I had endured. Watching the sun climb higher, spilling gold across the vast Kansas wheat fields, I forged a silent vow. Fear would not be my jailer. Caution, yes. Vigilance, absolutely. But I would not permit one man's depravity to extinguish my belief in the journey, my fragile trust in the possibility of good. Later, my car, miraculously restored, hummed beneath me. I guided it back onto the highway. The asphalt stretched onward, an ambiguous path laden with untold possibilities and, yes, inherent dangers. But I met its gaze steadily. I was ready. Because sometimes the most profound journeys are not those that transport us across landscapes, but those that reveal the unplumbed depths of who we truly are. And I knew, with the certainty born of terror and tenacity, that I was a survivor. The asphalt ribboned into the Stygian dark, a solitary thread unspooling before Elias as he piloted his car homeward through the deep hours. Exhaustion clung to him, a heavy shroud woven from the threads of a protracted workday, the siren song of his own bed, a cool shower, and oblivion called loudest. This route, a familiar vein through the countryside's quiet flesh, usually offered only the murmur of tires and the rare flash of opposing headlights. Tonight, however, vibrated with a different frequency, an almost imperceptible hum of tension beneath the placid surface of the ordinary. Midnight had likely struck, the world holding its breath, when his headlamp snagged on a shape beside the tarmac. A figure solitary, etched against the void. Swathed in a dark hooded garment, its cowl pulled low, the face remained a cipher drowned in shadow. One hand lifted, thumb extended in the timeless plea of the roadside supplicant. Miles had bled away since Elias had last encountered another traveler, and a flicker of civic duty warred with a primal reluctance. Something about the stillness, the utter anonymity, broadcast caution. He held the wheel steady, gaze fixed ahead, attempting to dismiss the prickle of disquiet. Yet as his car swept past, a glance into the rearview mirror revealed the figure, unmoving, a sentinel tracking his departure. A tremor, cold and unwelcome, traced his spine. Had he erred? The question surfaced, only to be submerged by fatigue. Onward. Several miles dissolved under his wheels. Elias felt the knot in his shoulders begin to ease, the rational mind whispering dismissals. A trick of light, late-night nerves. Then, impossibly, he saw it again. Or rather, him. Same posture, same hooded obscurity by the roadside, thumb aloft, waiting. Elias's stomach plummeted. Logic screamed denial. No turns taken, no reduction in speed, no other vehicles had passed. He surged past this second iteration, eyes locked forward, refusing the mirror's potential confirmation. His pulse hammered against his ribs, a frantic drummer accompanying a mind scrambling for explanation. Coincidence? Another soul adrift in the night? No, a deeper, colder certainty settled in his gut. It was the same entity, and it was somehow pacing him. He drove now with white-knuckled intensity, the wheel slick beneath his palms, his vision sweeping the looming darkness ahead. The familiar trees fringing the road seemed transformed, their branches skeletal fingers clawing at the encroaching night, casting distorted, grasping shadows. Focus, he commanded himself. Focus on home. But the sensation of being observed, a palpable weight on his senses, refused to lift. Another mile, perhaps two, crawled by. The tension ebbed slightly, paranoia mocked by the monotonous road. Then, rounding a gentle curve, Elias confronted the impossible made manifest. The figure stood planted squarely in the center of his path, facing the oncoming vehicle, arms slack at its sides, utterly inert. Elias slammed the brakes. Tires shrieked protest on the asphalt as the car shuddered to a halt, mere yards from the obstruction. He sat frozen, breath catching in his throat, the figure starkly illuminated in the high beams. It didn't flinch, didn't react. Motionless. A silent, hooded challenge. Fear, raw and paralyzing, surged through him. Turn around. Flee. His instinct screamed, yet his limbs remained leaden, his gaze tethered to the shape before him. An eternity seemed compressed into those silent seconds, punctuated only by the engine's low thrum and Elias's own ragged breathing. Then slowly the head tilted upward. Elias caught a glimpse beneath the cowl, a face bleached of color, spectral, dominated by eyes like pools of ink, bottomless and cold, fixing him with an unnerving intensity devoid of any discernible emotion. No malice, no welcome, just an empty, profound stare that seemed to penetrate steel and glass. That was enough. More than enough. Shaking violently, Elias wrenched the gear shift into reverse. The car lurched backward, tires spitting gravel. He spun the wheel, slewing the vehicle around in a desperate arc, and then floored the accelerator, rocketing away from the static horror. His eyes darted compulsively to the rearview mirror, expecting, dreading to see it still standing there. But the road behind him was only an empty, receding maw of darkness. He didn't dare ease his speed until the distant, hazy glow of his town appeared, a fragile bastion against the immense night. Relief washed over him in a dizzying wave. He drew a shuddering breath, attempting to regain control. It was over. He was nearing safety. Yet pulling into the familiar sanctuary of his own driveway, the disquiet returned, a phantom limb of fear. He scanned the quiet street, the shadowed lawns, half convinced he'd find the figure waiting amongst the suburban stillness. Nothing. Just the ordinary night, whispering reassurances he couldn't quite believe. Inside, the deadbolt slid home with a satisfying thud. Elias made straight for the bathroom, seeking the cleansing ritual of water and the anchoring familiarity of his surroundings under the harsh, bright light. He began to rationalize, to persuade himself it had been a hallucination born of weariness and isolation. As he toweled his face dry, a sound intruded. Faint, almost subliminal. A tapping. From the front door. He froze, every nerve ending alight, his heart instantly resuming its frantic rhythm. The tapping persisted. Soft, rhythmic, not the firm rap of knuckles, but the delicate, insistent drumming of fingertips. Taking a steadying breath, Elias crept to the door, pressed his eye to the peephole. The porch lay empty, bathed in the amber glow of the overhead light. He waited, listening intently. Silence. Perhaps the wind, a loose branch. He turned away, seeking the mundane comfort of the bathroom once more. It came again, louder this time, more demanding. Elias spun back, adrenaline surging, and flung the door open, bracing for the confrontation. Empty porch, silent street, still night air. He stepped onto the threshold, peering into the shadows. No one. Retreating inside, double-locking the door, Elias tried to dispel the dread that clung to him like damp chill. He collapsed onto the sofa, flicking on the television, hoping the electronic chatter would drown out the silence and the fear. It didn't work. Every settling groan of the house, every distant nocturnal sound jolted him upright, his thoughts inevitably circling back to the pale face, the vacant eyes. Eventually, sheer exhaustion claimed him, pulling him into a fitful, shallow sleep plagued by disturbing visions. The hooded figure, those eyes fixed upon him, unblinking as if imparting some dreadful silent message. He snapped awake later, heart pounding in the absolute dark, the silence profound. He lay rigid, listening, scanning the unseen corners of the room. Just as drowsiness threatened to reclaim him, he heard it. The tapping. Soft. Rhythmic. And this time, undeniably from inside the house. He sat bolt upright, trembling. The sound continued, steady as a metronome, counting down towards... What? Elias rose, moving with ghost-like quiet, feet whispering on the floorboards as he navigated the darkened house, drawn towards the source. It led him to the living room. The tapping seemed to emanate from the large window overlooking the backyard. He approached with agonizing slowness, pulse throbbing in his ears, a cold dread coiling in his stomach. Hand trembling, he reached for the heavy curtain, pulled it aside and looked out. There, inches from the glass, the figure stood pressed against the window pane, face level with his own. Those same cold, empty eyes locked onto Elias's. One hand was flat against the glass, fingers drumming that soft rhythmic tattoo, a ghastly invitation or a dire warning. Elias stumbled backward, a strangled cry caught in his throat. Run! His mind shrieked, but his gaze was held captive, mesmerized by the silent tapping horror. The figure remained utterly still, save for the hypnotic motion of its fingers, its eyes filled with an unreadable, terrifying depth. Elias finally broke the spell, scrambling backward, turning and fleeing down the hallway. He slammed the bedroom door shut, fumbling with the lock, collapsing against the solid wood barrier. He sat there in the suffocating darkness, back pressed hard against the door, listening to the profound silence, waiting. The tapping had ceased. The house was still. But the question echoed in the terrified void of his mind. Was it still out there, just beyond the window, beyond the door, waiting? Morning arrived, pale and uncertain. Elias meticulously checked every window, every door, searching for any tangible proof of the night's visitation. There was none. No footprints marred the dew-kissed lawn, no smudges disturbed the window panes, no sign that anyone, anything, had stood so terrifyingly close. Yet the memory remained, sharp and indelible. And sometimes when the house settles deep into the night, Elias hears it again, or perhaps only imagines he does. A faint rhythmic tapping, a ghostly echo in the silence, reminding him that the watcher from the roadside might still be out there, patiently waiting. A dissonance struck me the instant I crossed the threshold into the living room that morning. Ghostly plastic shrouded every piece of furniture. The walls stood half-flayed from the recent demolition. Yet an unfamiliar cold permeated the air, a chill deeper than any draft. Silas, the contractor I'd hired, beckoned me over, his weathered finger pointing towards an anomalous circular aperture marring the plaster. It hadn't existed yesterday. It certainly featured in no blueprint I possessed. Its presence was an enigma. Barely 3 inches across, something about its perimeter unsettled me. The edges looked chipped, yet not by tool or accident. It was as if the wall itself had overnight sprouted a mouth. I stood rooted, striving to mask my unease from Silas. He was an older man, all rough knuckles and unflinching eyes. "Never laid eyes on the like," he grunted, his tone matter-of-fact. "We'll seal it up come tomorrow." Confidence radiated from him. I offered a mute nod, words failing me. Beneath the surface, though, a peculiar tension coiled tight within me. Drifting closer, I pressed my palm flat against the wall surrounding the orifice, distinctly colder than the surrounding plaster. Just the wind finding a new way in, I rationalized silently. Silas slapped a piece of duct tape over the hole, a temporary measure, promising a permanent fix. Soon after his departure for the day, I attempted normalcy. Dusk bled into night, settling heavy on the renovation-ravaged apartment. Navigating the gloom meant threading past paint cans and the looming skeleton of a ladder just to reach the kitchen. The living room swam in dimness, 2 bulbs sacrificed earlier to some other task. Outside, a sputtering street lamp threw kinetic shadows that writhed and danced across the wounded walls. I sought refuge in the flickering blue light of late-night television, but the moment silence fell, a hushed sound surfaced. Faint initially, like air sighing through a crevice. "Imagination," I insisted. Then it returned, more defined, disturbingly akin to someone murmuring my name, Elias. First, paralysis. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden quiet. My gaze locked onto the taped-over spot on the wall. The silver patch remained, yet its edges seemed looser, peeling slightly, as if under pressure from within. I rose, compelled, crossed the floor, and pressed my ear to the cool plaster. Silence held for a beat. Then, breathing. Heavy, labored inhalations, or so my strained senses interpreted. A desperate urge to dismiss it warred with undeniable reality when my name breathed out again. Not crisp, but the shape of the syllables, Elias, was unmistakable. A hushed, desperate plea. My scalp tightened. I recoiled, stumbling back into the center of the room, adrift in indecision. Hallucination? Stress, surely. Renovations disrupt routines, invite chaos. The mind conjures phantoms to cope. Yes, that had to be it. A trick of the wind, perhaps. My fingers found the edge of the tape. I peeled it back. The hole regarded me, seemingly wider now. 4 inches, perhaps. Uncertainty gnawed. Leaning in again, ear hovering near the opening, a blast of frigid air struck my face, my neck, raising gooseflesh in its wake. I staggered back. This cold felt alien, invasive, utterly wrong for my living room. Then the voice, clearer this time, impossible to ignore. My name, Elias, followed by 2 distinct words. "Help me." My hands began to tremble. The strip of tape forgotten in my grip fluttered to the floor. "Who's there?" I whispered, the sound thin and reedy in the charged silence. I didn't expect a reply. My own voice quaked, a frantic pulse thudded in my chest. The question hung, suspended. Then, soft but urgent, "I need you to come closer." Around me the apartment remained empty, yet the voice was immediate, intimate, emanating from just beyond that impossible breach. I fought for composure, took a hesitant step forward, leaned in, slowly, cautiously, extended a finger into the void, probing for a draft source, a hidden pipe. My fingertip encountered something cold, damp. A subtle current seemed to tug at my skin from the other side. I snatched my hand back, wiping it instinctively on my jeans. Adrenaline surged, a buzzing current beneath my skin. Breath came in shallow bursts. "How did you get in there?" A ludicrous question, born of sheer incomprehension. The response was thin, strained. "I've been stuck here. Please." My gaze darted around the disheveled room. Call someone? Who? The police? Another contractor? The sheer absurdity of explaining. "There's someone trapped inside my wall," paralyzed me. They deem me mad. I decided to probe further. Leaning towards the aperture again, I asked, "What do you need me to do?" Faintly, "Keep talking to me, don't leave me." A strange confluence of emotions swelled within me. Profound pity tangled with visceral fear. The desperation was palpable, achingly human, yet the logistics defied reason. A crawl space? An old service shaft? The building wasn't ancient. This section of wall was supposedly solid concrete. For the next hour I conversed with the unseen presence. My questions about its predicament yielded only more pleas for rescue, never answers. It clung to my name, Elias, thanking me breathlessly each time I reassured it I wouldn't leave. Tension knotted my shoulders. My eyes scanned the periphery, anticipating something. During our strange communion, the hole seemed to imperceptibly widen, perhaps by another inch. Its friable edges continued to self-destruct, shedding small flakes of plaster onto the floorboards. No tool was visible, no discernible force at play. It simply eroded. Intermittently, a faint, slow scraping sound reached me, like fingernails dragged across stone. Weariness began to claim me. The day's stress compounded by this nocturnal nightmare left me drained. I told the voice I needed to rest. A whimper answered, a raw plea not to be abandoned. I promised I would return in the morning. Unease prickled across my entire body. I left a single dim lamp burning in the living room, a reluctant sentinel, before retreating to my bedroom and locking the door. A barrier that had never felt necessary until this night. Sleep was a fragmented, haunted affair. Each time my eyelids drifted shut, visions bloomed, the hole swelling, devouring the wall, disgorging something unknown into my home. I startled awake at least 4 times, convinced I heard furtive footsteps shuffling in the hallway outside my locked door. Morning arrived with a throbbing headache and trembling hands. Steeling myself, I ventured back into the living room. The hole was undeniably larger, 6 inches wide now, easily, and deeper. It wasn't just drywall and insulation within. It plunged into darkness, resembling the mouth of a tunnel. Retrieving a flashlight from a kitchen drawer, I aimed its beam into the void. The light penetrated only so far, revealing a passage stretching back before curving away from sight. Its composition was unclear. Concrete, raw stone. The voice remained silent. I called out my name tentatively. Nothing stirred in response. The day unfolded under a pall of distraction. Silas texted, a family emergency. He wouldn't return until the following day. Left alone with the anomaly, I paced the confines of my apartment, drawn back to the hole every few minutes. By late afternoon, faint tapping sounds commenced from within. Delicate space taps, as if something were tentatively testing the wall's integrity. Crouching, I pressed my ear close once more. That invasive cold touched my skin, making me flinch. Then the voice returned, softer than before, almost spectral. I'm still here. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Who are you? I demanded again, needing an anchor in this sea of strangeness. A pause stretched. "I don't know," it answered, the admission chilling me to the bone. It stared into the Stygian darkness for a long moment, pulse hammering at my temples. The voice added, almost an afterthought, "I only know I need your help." No further explanation offered. Frustration flared. "I can't pull you out if I don't know where you are," I argued, stepping closer. The hole's edges were jagged now, a crude wound in the plaster. More debris littered the floor at my feet. The voice only whispered, "Please don't leave." Its tone seemed weaker, frayed, as if its energy waned. A resolve hardened within me. I had to see more, understand more. Rolling up my sleeve, I carefully inserted my arm into the opening, pushing deeper, elbow deep. The space within was profoundly cold, damp. The texture lining the passage felt gritty, coarse like unworked stone. My questing fingertips brushed only empty air. The void felt immense. Ignoring the rising tide of revulsion, I pushed further. Suddenly something grazed my hand. A feather-light touch, disturbingly like another hand attempting to grasp mine. I yanked my arm back violently, breath catching in my throat. Goosebumps erupted across my skin. I stared, heart pounding at the hole, half expecting a pale hand to emerge into the dim light. Nothing. My phone buzzed sharply in my pocket, making me jump. A friend checking in. I stammered some excuse about being busy, unable to articulate the bizarre reality unfolding around me. Glancing back at the wall, I registered that the hole had gaped wider still, perhaps 8 inches across now. The floor was scattered with a fresh constellation of plaster shards. The expansion was inexorable, slow but relentless. Silas's temporary patch would be meaningless. Action was required. Evening shadows began their stealthy creep across the room. The voice regained some urgency, growing more desperate. It called my name, Elias, repeatedly interspersed with fragmented cries of "Help, help," or plaintive murmurs of "I'm cold." Pity warred fiercely with terror. I tried rapping on adjacent walls, searching for resonance, any hint of a hidden corridor or cavity. Solid. All solid. I could almost feel the sturdy bones of the building beneath the superficial wounds. Nothing suggested a secret chamber. The situation remained utterly nonsensical. From my toolkit, I retrieved a crowbar. Perhaps if I widened the opening myself, broke away more plaster, I could gain clarity. A sliver of fear warned against potentially unleashing something dangerous, but the voice's pitiful sounds eroded my caution. I tapped the wall near the hole's ragged edge. "I can feel you," the voice whispered, the proximity sending a fresh wave of dread washing over me. Hesitantly at first, then with growing force, I began prying at the edges. Plaster chunks rained down, exposing more of the dark interior. Shining the flashlight beam inside again, I could discern a narrow passage extending several feet back before sharply curving to the right. A blast of air, colder than anything yet, struck me full in the face. It was bitter, elemental, stinging my eyes, making my teeth chatter uncontrollably. "Can you come closer to the opening?" I asked, my voice tight. Silence. I tried again. Only a long drawn-out exhalation answered, like a sigh, disturbingly close, perhaps only a foot from the entrance. Leaning in, flashlight beam sweeping the confined space, I saw it, the definite shape of a pale shoulder, a fleeting glimpse before it melted back into the deeper shadows. I froze, then sank back onto the floor, legs suddenly weak. It was real, not a hallucination. Something physical or partially so resided behind my wall. I sat there for an indeterminate time, grappling with the implications. "Don't leave me alone," the voice pleaded closer now. My heart hammered against my ribs. I realized I was slick with sweat despite the penetrating cold. "I'm here," I managed, my voice strained. I don't know how to help you yet." The next hour passed in a haze of tense activity. I attacked the wall with the crowbar, chipping away more plaster and lathe. The hole grew, wide enough now for my arm and shoulder to fit through. Dust filled the air, choking me, stinging my eyes. The passage inside looked like a rough-hewn burrow snaking away to the right. Visibility remained limited. The voice became a constant urging presence. "Come in," it whispered, coaxed. But the opening wasn't large enough for my whole body. Not yet. I needed more leverage, perhaps the sledgehammer. Worry gnawed. How much could I remove before compromising the wall's integrity? I considered calling Silas again, but it was late, past 9, and he'd already confirmed for tomorrow. I stared at the ragged portal I'd created, almost large enough to crawl through. The voice was so near now I imagined I could feel its breath on my face, a bizarre mingling of intense cold and something stale, like musty earth. My stomach churned. A desert dryness coated my tongue. "I'll get a better tool," I told it, my voice raspy. "Hang on." But as I rose, turning towards the hall closet where the heavier hammer lay, the voice cried out, laced with sudden panic, "Hurry! It's closing!" I spun back, eyes fixed on the hole. Did the edges seem to tremble? Was the structure shifting? Placing a hand flat on the wall beside the opening, I felt a fleeting warmth, instantly replaced by the pervasive chill. My mind raced. I bolted to the closet, fumbled for the sledgehammer, and hurried back. The hole didn't look demonstrably smaller, but an undeniable urgency pulsed in the air, mirroring the frantic beat in my own chest. I swung the hammer, connecting with the edge of the opening. Concrete dust and small chunks flew. Again and again. My arms began to ache, protesting the exertion. Finally, the gap was wide enough. If I crouched low, I could squeeze through. Hesitantly, I pushed my head into the newly expanded space. The air turned instantly bitingly frigid. My breath plumed invisible clouds before me. Gritting my teeth against the cold and a rising tide of fear, I forced myself forward, wriggling in up to my waist, flashlight beam dancing erratically. The passage immediately curved right, just as I'd glimpsed, barely wide enough to crawl. The walls felt rough, jagged, as if clawed from the earth. My pulse roared in my ears. The voice was a constant, intimate whisper now. This way. A strange magnetism pulled me forward, even as every primal instinct screamed for retreat. My flashlight beam flickered ominously. The cold was becoming unbearable, seeping into my bones. My teeth chattered violently, my fingers grew numb. I dragged myself a few inches further, my back scraping against the confining wall. Then, a scraping sound, louder than before, resonated through the narrow space, seeming to come from all around me. A heavy dread settled in my gut. Visions of the wall collapsing behind me, trapping me in this cold, dark place flooded my mind. Could I even turn around in here? Could I get back out? That's when I felt it, the lightest, most ephemeral touch upon my shoulder. I jerked violently, nearly dropping the flashlight. The beam swung wildly, illuminating nothing but rough-hewn surfaces. No one was visible, yet the presence was undeniable, palpable. And the voice, impossibly close, breathed directly into my ear. "Thank you." My skin crawled. "I can't see you," I cried out, voice trembling uncontrollably. "Where are you?" "Here," it whispered, and I felt another faint brush against my arm, a guiding pressure urging me onward. I reached my limit. My breath came in ragged gasps, body slick with cold sweat despite the freezing temperature. The confined space pressed in, making each inhalation an effort. No plan, no clear way back if things went wrong. My entire body shook. "I'll come back," I stammered, the words torn from me. "With someone else. I need help." Panic surged in the voice. "Please, don't leave me alone here." My gaze plunged down the light-swallowing passage. My heart felt like it might fracture my ribs with its frantic pounding. I began to back out, slowly, painstakingly, my shoes scraping against the gritty floor. "No, don't go," the voice pleaded, desperate, fading slightly as I retreated. But I forced myself backward, inch by painful inch, propelled by sheer, unadulterated terror. Finally, I tumbled back out into the relative safety of my living room, gasping for air, sweat stinging my eyes. The gaping hole in the wall remained, a dark maw revealing the entrance to that inexplicable tunnel. I collapsed onto the floor, leaning heavily against the shrouded couch, the sledgehammer still clutched tight in my hand. My body trembled violently. The voice continued to call for me from the depths, weaker now, but persistent. "Elias. Elias." I stayed put, paralyzed by fear and confusion. Re-entering alone was unthinkable. No logical framework existed for this space, this voice. My apartment wall was fundamentally wrong. Something resided behind it, something that needed help, or claimed it did. And it wanted me to venture deeper into its cold embrace. I resolved then to simply wait. Wait for Silas. Wait for morning. I sat there, huddled in the dimly lit room, struggling to regulate my breathing, my eyes fixed on that ragged opening. Occasionally shadows seemed to shift within its depths, or a gust of that unnatural cold would breathe out into the room. The voice called less frequently as the hours crawled by, but it never fell completely silent. It remained a quiet, haunting presence, whispering my name as if I were its only lifeline in the vast, uncaring darkness. Sleep was impossible. I just sat there gripping the hammer, staring into the void, and waited for the dawn. Deep within the archival catacombs, where Tuesday nights dissolved into stale, unmoving air, I labored. Dust motes danced in the weak cone of my utility lamp, illuminating shelves bowed under the weight of forgotten histories. My assignment from Ms. Thorne: sift through strata of neglected file boxes, discard the chaff. Yet a reluctance stayed my hand. Who was I to deem decades worthless without scrutiny? Thus my fingers snagged on a simple shoebox, incongruous amidst the official ledgers. Inside, nestled like dormant secrets, lay cassette tapes, personal effects perhaps, jettisoned by some long-departed clerk. Then, a label snagged my eye, stark against the beige plastic. March 14th, 2026, a date yet to dawn, adrift in the year 2025. The tape felt unnaturally heavy in my palm, a knot cinched tight in my gut, heat prickled the back of my neck. An error, I reasoned, a misprint, maybe a bizarre bureaucratic joke. Still, clutching the anomalous artifact, I navigated the labyrinthine aisles to the basement's desolate annex office. There, coated in grime, sat a relic, a cassette player. My hand, betraying a tremor I couldn't quell, fumbled with the tape deck. The door emitted a tortured squeal as I slid the cassette home. Play. A burst of static then. A voice. Unmistakably mine. "I'm standing in the corner of my living room," it murmured, the cadence eerily familiar. trying to decide if I should answer the phone. The recording unspooled, narrating the utterly mundane, the specific brand of artisanal coffee I'd only just discovered last week, a prickle of anxiety about an upcoming presentation. It concluded with a casual mention of a minor power disruption expected at my apartment complex. Around 9 o'clock, the voice predicted, tomorrow evening. My mouth turned to parchment. A vice clamped around my chest. Was reason fraying at the edges? I scanned the cramped office, half anticipating a hidden camera, a gotcha moment. Silence answered. Just me, the humming machine, and the silent weight of the other tapes. I ejected the cassette, turning it over, scrutinizing the label. March 14th, 2026. Over a year away. A trick of acoustics, I told myself. The voice merely resembled mine. Later, back in the sterile quiet of my apartment, the recording echoed. Dinner was a blur, television a meaningless flicker. Anxiety coiled within me, tightening its grip as the evening deepened. My gaze kept returning to the clock, each minute dragging towards 9. 9:03 p.m., lights blazing. Relief washed over me, sharp and sudden, followed by a nervous laugh at my own suggestibility. Then, at precisely 9:07 p.m., darkness plunged the room into absolute black. A heartbeat, 2, 10. Then the power surged back, fluorescent lights humming innocently. I remained frozen, staring, sweat beading on my brow as my heart hammered against my ribs. The tape. A flicker, not a blackout. But it had known. Shaking, I paced the confines of my living room, logic grappling with the undeniable. Coincidence? The timing felt too deliberate, too exact. Morning found me descending once more into the subterranean stillness. Work beckoned, yet my focus drifted inexorably toward the shoebox. Resistance crumbled. I examined the other cassettes. Dates stretched months, years into the future. Cryptic labels adorned others. The meeting. The car. The leak. Penned chillingly in what looked undeniably like my own script, though I possessed no memory of writing them. A tremor started deep in my chest, vibrating up into my throat. My lips felt parched. I selected the meeting, slotted it into the player. Again my voice disembodied yet intimate. It spoke of an impending summons from Miss Thorne, head of archives. It detailed her attire, the exact time, the specific frustrations I would harbor, the assignment of a burdensome new project. The recording concluded with a weary pronouncement. I walk out of that room knowing I can't escape this situation. Gooseflesh prickled my arms. The grimy wall clock showed nearly noon. Miss Thorne had requested a meeting, 1 p.m. regarding next quarter's initiatives. My throat constricted, a clammy sweat broke out. Ignore it, I commanded myself. See what unfolds. At 12:50 p.m. I ascended, chest hollow, ears ringing. The meeting commenced precisely at 1. Miss Thorne wore a charcoal gray blazer. Restructuring, she announced. A more demanding role for me. A new project. My palms grew slick against the chair arms. Every predicted detail materialized. I walked out precisely as foretold. Cornered. Drained. Back in the basement's embrace, the corridor lights flickered erratically. A paranoid glance over my shoulder. Was I watched? My back muscles tensed as I shouldered open the heavy metal door. The shoebox waited, sentinel on the desk. A visceral urge to incinerate the tapes warred with an insatiable need to understand. A cold knot formed in my stomach as I chose another cassette, labeled simply "Work" in black marker. Play. My voice again, charting the immediate future. A minor dispute with Ben, a colleague over misfiled documents. A scald from the break room coffee machine, and then The discovery of a hidden passage deep in the basement leading to an unknown storage sector. My breath hitched. A hidden corridor. Impossible. Yet the tape insisted. I'd stumble on a loose floor tile, brace against the far wall, and it would yield, revealing an older forgotten chamber. Disbelief warred with a chilling certainty. The following day, while wrestling with archaic binders, Ben appeared, irritation etched on his face. A box I'd processed was mislabeled, disrupting his inventory. A brief, tense exchange ensued. Minor, yes, but congruent with the tape. Calm frayed at the edges. A subtle tremor took hold. Later, seeking caffeine, I approached the temperamental coffee machine. A sudden spurt of scalding water splashed my left hand. A yelp, a muttered curse. Running my hand under cold water, the tape's prediction echoed, sharp and clear. Tension mounted, rendering simple tasks arduous. That afternoon, burdened by a stack of ledgers, navigating the uneven floor, my foot caught on a loose tile. I lurched, binders threatening to spill. My hand shot out, palm slapping against the rearmost wall for balance. A faint click. The wall section shifted inward perhaps 2 inches. My heart leaped, lodging itself in my throat. I pushed again. Silent, oiled hinges swung a panel inward, releasing a gust of profoundly ancient, musty air. Snatching a nearby flashlight, I pierced the darkness. Rows of decaying crates, rusted shelving piled high with records even older than those in the main archive. A hidden world. In a far corner, a dilapidated desk, a broken chair beside it, and upon the desk, another cassette player. Different model, older, layered in dust. Nudging the chair aside, chest tight, I lifted the player. Frayed cord. Beside it, a scattering of unlabeled tapes, identical brand to those in the shoebox. Adrenaline surged, hot and electric. My head swam. Breathing grew shallow. What lay buried here? Leagues weak, I backed away, pulling the secret door closed until it clicked shut, my trembling hands cold against the disguised surface. At my own workstation, I fought for composure. The tapes weren't suggestion. They were scripture. My voice, my future, inextricably linked. The pounding in my chest wouldn't subside. Rummaging through the shoebox, I counted them. 20 tapes. Labels varied. Near dates, distant dates. Those cryptic words. One bore today's date. Today. My temples throbbed as I inserted it. Play. My own voice emerging from the hiss. I'm standing in the basement at around 5 in the afternoon, too scared to open the next door. I keep checking the corridor to make sure I'm alone. I feel my heart pounding. I listen to the recording of myself describing these exact actions. I realize I can't avoid the next step. Pause. The wall clock, 4:55 p.m. My ribcage vibrated. Play. Teeth clenched. I know I can't throw these tapes away. I'll try to figure out who made them or why they exist, but I'm afraid of what I'll discover next. Silence. The recording ended. My mouth was desert dry, blood hammering in my temples. Swiftly, I wrapped the tapes in discarded newsprint, grabbed the player I'd been using, stuffed everything into my duffel bag. A final check of the empty corridor, then hurried footsteps up the stairs into the fading light. The drive home was fraught, the bag on the passenger seat radiating a palpable tension. Shoulders rigid, jaw aching from clenching, I forced my eyes onto the road, yet my mind replayed my own prophetic voice. Inside my apartment, lock secured, windows checked, I placed the cassette player on the kitchen table. A battlefield of desire. Listen to them all, know everything, or hurl them into the nearest dumpster, sever the connection. The knowledge once heard felt like a cage, snapping shut around a predetermined path. Trembling hands, sweat trickling. I yielded. Another tape. Next week. Play. Crackle. My voice detailed an encounter at the supermarket, running into Marcus, an old college acquaintance. A conversation veering towards structural issues in the archive building's foundation. Specifics piled up, my pulse accelerating. Mention of a hairline crack near my basement desk. The tape concluded. I realize these tapes are controlling me, but I can't stop listening. Off. Breath ragged. The compulsion to continue was a physical ache. Days bled into a cycle of prediction and fulfillment. The supermarket rendezvous unfolded verbatim. Marcus materialized from years past, recognized me instantly, inquired about the archives, casually mentioned foundation problems in old buildings. I stood paralyzed in the cereal aisle, heart thudding, palm slick on the shopping cart handle. Each tape played, each prophecy manifest. Sleep became fragmented, punctuated by waking terrors, half expecting my recorded voice to whisper from the shadows. At work, every creak and groan of the old building sent jolts of paranoia through me. Confiding in someone felt impossible. Who would believe such a fractured reality? The tapes accumulated in my apartment, a growing testament to my unraveling autonomy. My voice chronicled conversations yet to happen, city minutiae, nascent personal habits that bloomed into existence shortly after hearing them described. So now, I sit here, transcribing this descent. Tapes remain, their labels promising glimpses far beyond the coming month. Playing them all feels like swallowing my entire future whole. My legs tremble beneath the table. My hands are icy. The cassette marked 1 year from now exerts a terrifying gravity. Fear paralyzes my fingers, yet the thought of discarding it feels equally impossible. What crucial warning might I miss? My heart refuses to settle, a frantic drum against my ribs as I survey the pile. Tomorrow, I resolved, I return to that hidden chamber. Search for a clue, a name, a note, anything to explain this temporal anomaly, this haunting vocal mimicry. Bile rises at the thought of that musty darkness, yet avoidance feels futile. The tapes dictate the script, and the script is unerringly accurate. That first playback reverberates. My own voice, narrating an event hours before it occurred. Every attempt to dismiss it, to reclaim agency, is crushed by the subsequent perfect alignment of reality with recording. It is no dream, no elaborate hoax. My voice speaks my future, and it is always right. Trapped. My heart pounds as these words find the page. The cassette player sits to my right, the stack of tapes to my left. Sweat gathers on my forehead. I just checked the windows again. Locked. The next tape slated for listening is labeled tomorrow night. Perhaps answers await. Perhaps dread. There seems no exit. Only play, listen, and wait for the inevitable unfolding. My life fractured the moment I found those tapes. Wholeness feels like a forgotten language. I first discerned the mirror tucked away in a suffocating storage unit on the town's ragged fringe. The air hung thick with the scent of decaying upholstery and something acrid, like long cold coffee grounds. I recall the damp bloom of perspiration spreading across my back in the oppressive stillness. A local character, Gus, presided over the auction, hawking the accumulated detritus of years. Much was unremarkable. Skeletal chairs shedding dust, lamps bearing the chips of misfortune, scarred crates overflowing with vinyl ghosts. Then, leaning with weary nonchalance against a rust-pocked filing cabinet, I saw it. Not imposing in height, perhaps reaching my solar plexus, yet framed in substantial dark timber, its surface marred by history's scratches. My gaze snagged on it, inexplicably tethered, The glass offered no reflection, only a leaden, depthless sheen reminiscent of oxidized silver. Drawn closer, I crouched before it, a peculiar compulsion urging my fingertips toward the frame. It offered a contradictory landscape, passages of surprising smoothness yielding abruptly to territories of raw splinter, as if an attempt at restoration had faltered mid-stroke. The mirror's face remained opaque, veiled. Tilting my head, angling for purchase, I perceived the faintest adumbration within. A human contour, indistinct yet undeniably present, and not my own. I blinked, leaned forward until the tip of my nose nearly kissed the cool glass. The silhouette held fast, an unwavering phantom. Retreating a step, I expelled a slow breath, the unsteady thrum of my heart a drum against my ribs. Ignorance warred with fascination. Something profound, unsettling emanated from it. Gus, noticing my absorption, ambled over. A dry cough scraped his throat before he offered the mirror at a tempting price. An old piece, he mumbled, liberated from some estate clearance ages ago. He confessed a desire to be rid of it, citing a persistent unease it provoked. An eyebrow arched on my part elicited only a shrug and a figure startlingly modest. I nodded, the transaction completed with a rustle of cash. Soon the mirror was secured in the bed of my pickup. My own small establishment deals in antiquities. Finding a home for peculiar items wasn't usually a concern. Eccentricity often commanded a premium, and I reasoned some collector might appreciate its distinct aura. Little did I suspect the true dimensions of its strangeness. Back within the familiar quiet of my shop, I wrestled the mirror inside, propping it against the wall behind my counter. The instant my hands relinquished their grip, a disquieting tremor traced its path down my spine. My shop, typically a sanctuary of hushed reverence punctuated by the occasional shuffle of regulars, was deserted that afternoon. I secured the front door, the click of the lock echoing slightly, and turned back to face the artifact. A subtle luminescence now played across its surface. Approaching, I stood directly before it, anticipating the familiar sight of my own countenance. Nothing. Only a vacant mist clung to the glass, thick as coastal fog. A constriction tightened my chest. Hesitantly, I reached out, my fingers grazing the surface. Cold, profoundly cold. Then, the vapor stirred, coalescing. A face swam into view. Not my current face, but a variant, hair shorn closer to the scalp, a faint pale scar etching the skin just above the eyebrow. This reflection possessed its own agency. Its gaze met mine, hard and knowing, yet tinged with an unfamiliar animosity. I froze, my throat parched. As I instinctively withdrew my hand, the other Silas pressed his palm flat against the barrier from within, a perfect reverse gesture. I glanced down. My own arm hung slack at my side, yet his remained raised against the glass. My heart hammered, a frantic pulse echoing in the sudden strange buzzing that filled my ears. Soundlessly his lips moved, forming words I couldn't decipher, like observing a conversation through impenetrable soundproofing. The internal percussion in my head intensified. Paralysis held me captive. Flee or seek understanding. He mouthed the silent message again, the strain visible in his eyes. Then, as swiftly as it appeared, the image dissolved, leaving the mirror blank once more. I swallowed thickly, mopping sweat from my brow. A wave of dizziness washed over me, forcing me onto a nearby stool. After moments spent regaining equilibrium, I rose and circled the mirror, inspecting its mundane posterior. Plain wood, a backing of stiffened board affixed with tiny nails. A tentative tap yielded only solid resistance. Facing its front again, my ordinary reflection greeted me, tired, damp with perspiration, visibly unnerved. A shaky laugh escaped me. Surely an optical illusion, I reasoned. Fatigue, the heat, perhaps some subtle warping in the antique glass. I resolved to depart early, sliding the mirror into the seclusion of my back office, away from potential customer scrutiny. The drive home was mechanical, followed by a quick shower, a conscious effort to purge the unsettling encounter. Futile. The memory of that other self's gaze, the pressure of his hand against the glass, sent tremors through my own hands. I vowed a more thorough examination come morning. Sleep offered little respite that night, a restless churn of limbs and anxieties. Each time my eyelids drifted shut, the phantom Silas reappeared, his hand pressed insistently against the glass divide. Dawn found me unlocking the shop well before sunrise, the streetlight still casting long shadows. I made directly for the office. The mirror stood sentinel where I'd left it, leaning against a metal cabinet crowned with forgotten receipts. From a distance it appeared benign, merely an aged looking-glass bearing the scuffs of time. With a sigh, I stepped closer. The surface remained inert for several heartbeats, then shimmered. Another shape resolved. Me again, but advanced in years. Silver threaded my temples. I wore a suit of unfamiliar cut and richness. This iteration radiated calm. He raised a hand in a slow wave, revealing a heavy gold signet ring on his finger. My own hand, bare and clad in workaday denim, felt suddenly inadequate. My breath quickened. Then, this elder reflection turned his head slightly, as if acknowledging someone over his shoulder. The glass flickered, and abruptly, a second version of me materialized behind him, shouldering forward impatiently. This newcomer attempted to displace the older one. They exchanged glances laden with palpable frustration. A startling awareness of each other flickered between them. The faint buzzing returned, like static bleeding from a poorly tuned receiver. Their mouths worked, shaping silent arguments. Anger, perhaps desperation, tightened their features. Then the mirror flared white, wiping the slate clean. I stumbled back a step, heart pounding a frantic rhythm. For several days the mirror remained shrouded beneath a dropcloth in a corner of my office. Selling it felt impossible. A burgeoning dread concerning who might next encounter its peculiar phenomenon stayed my hand. Yet curiosity gnawed relentlessly. I'd find my gaze drifting toward the draped form, wondering if those other selves persisted behind the veil, perhaps observing me. Sleep continued to be a fraught, elusive state. Tension knotted my shoulders. A persistent nausea soured my stomach. Going to the shop became an exercise in conflicting impulses, aversion warring with an insatiable need to understand the mirror's secret. On the fifth evening, I lingered after closing. Locking the front door, I extinguished the main lights, leaving only the intimate glow of a desk lamp to carve shapes from the office gloom. With trembling hands, I removed the sheet. The ensuing silence felt profound, heavy. I waved a hand tentatively before the glass. For a moment, nothing. Then the surface rippled. A younger Silas emerged, perhaps from several years past, sporting a forgotten hairstyle and a jacket I once favored. This reflection stared directly at me, lips moving, and I distinctly perceived the silent articulation of my own name. Silas. Instantly a second figure intruded, jostling the first aside. A third crowded in behind them, each a variation on my theme. Differing attire, hair, posture, yet undeniably me. My pulse surged. A silent, furious argument erupted within the glass. Hands gestured sharply. Accusing fingers pointed directly out toward me. My chest constricted. I recognized the distinct emotional signatures etched on each face: simmering anger, raw desperation, steely determination. The younger one in the jacket tapped insistently on the glass, then pointed at me, shaking his head vehemently. The older suited version slid into view from the right, pressing a finger to his lips in a gesture of caution before beckoning me closer. Another iteration, this one appearing weathered, his left arm encased in plaster, shoved forward, countering the suited man's gesture with a frantic headshake. Then all three turned as a fourth materialized. This one possessed a stern demeanor, clad in some unfamiliar uniform. The silent squabble intensified, a chaotic jostling for position, shoulders bumping, each seemingly desperate to claim the foreground. A knot tightened in my stomach. Placing my hand flat on the mirror's wooden frame, I felt a subtle vibration beneath my fingertips, a faint thrumming energy. Swallowing against the dryness in my throat, I leaned closer. "What do you want?" The words emerged as a ragged whisper. I saw the older reflection mouth a response. Immediately the others erupted in silent protest. The uniformed figure forcefully shoved the suited man aside. The older Silas stumbled, an incongruous sight within the two-dimensional plane, like bodies straining against the confines of a narrow passage. My breathing grew shallow, rapid. Questions spiraled. Were these potential futures? Were they battling for dominance, trying to eliminate rival timelines? My attention snagged again on the younger Silas in the jacket. He pressed his hand firmly against the glass, his gaze locking with mine. A wave of icy cold washed through me. Though still soundless, his lip movements were slow, deliberate. He seemed to be warning me. "Don't listen to them." The suited Silas noticed, casting a venomous glare at his younger counterpart. I recoiled, my hands shaking uncontrollably. A faint, distinct sound reached me then. Tap, 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 like fingernails rapping on glass from the inside. Leaning forward once more, I saw the younger reflection tapping the barrier, pointing urgently at me, his eyes wide with frantic intensity. My mind raced, a frantic search for logic in the impossible. If these were branching paths, how could I possibly discern which to trust? The pressure in my chest felt immense, suffocating. Perhaps each reflection fought for its very existence, needing to become the definitive version of Silas. The suited man jabbed a finger inches from the younger one's face. The man with the cast shoved the uniformed one back. They were antagonists, rivals needing to eliminate the competition before I inadvertently cemented one future into reality. Stumbling backward, I nearly overturned a stack of archival boxes. My ankle twisted sharply. A groan escaped me as I clutched the desk to remain upright. Pain radiated up my leg, yet my gaze remained fixed on the mirror. The reflections were now openly grappling, pushing and shoving. Their eyes, intense and focused, sought mine whenever a gap opened in their struggle. Nausea churned within me. Sweat trickled down my temple. Two paths seemed clear: destroy the mirror or attempt to master it. The initial investment, coupled with the relentless consuming curiosity, swayed me. I would try something else first. Reaching out, I pressed both palms flat against the cold glass. My breath hitched. The surface remained frigid, yet the pulsing vibration intensified beneath my hands. The reflections froze mid-struggle, their collective gaze snapping to my hands. Their eyes darted between each other, expectant, waiting for my next move. Applying firm pressure, I whispered, "I can't hear you. Show me what you want." Silence reigned for a heartbeat. Then, the reflection with the plaster cast reached into a pocket, producing a small notebook. He began flipping through its pages rapidly, holding it up to the glass. The script was illegible from my vantage point, but his insistence was clear. Suddenly, the suited Silas snatched the notebook, tossing it dismissively aside within their mirrored world. He then reached inside his jacket, withdrawing what looked like a folded check or contract, brandishing it before the glass. The younger Silas in the jacket reacted instantly, slamming his hand down on the suited man's wrist, sending the paper fluttering away. They wrestled silently while the uniformed reflection maneuvered, trying to wedge himself back into the forefront. I remained there, palms pressed against the glass, a dull ache spreading through my hands. My breathing grew labored. My mind felt suspended, trapped in observing their frantic pantomime. The impulse to break contact, to turn away, warred with an undeniable compulsion to witness, to understand. They were me, fractured and refracted. Answers felt imperative. My shoulders radiated tension, my eyes burned from the lack of blinking. I watched their silent, desperate theater unfold. The uniformed one glanced at me, then sharply at the others, before pointing decisively outside the mirror's frame, seemingly indicating something behind me in the office. I hesitated, turning my head slightly. Dust motes danced in the lamplight, illuminating familiar shelves. Nothing else stirred. When I looked back, the uniformed reflection was closer, pressing against the glass. He mouthed a single unintelligible word. Abruptly, the mirror's surface flickered violently, and all of them vanished. I was left staring at my own reflection, pale, sweat-streaked, utterly alone. A profound exhaustion settled over me. My legs felt unsteady. I leaned heavily on the desk for support. I stood there for a long while, the sound of my own ragged breathing loud in the stillness. The mirror reflected only my present reality, devoid of phantoms. I checked the locked door again, a needless confirmation, then turned back to my reflection, scrutinizing every detail, half expecting another Silas to ripple into existence. The surface remained placidly reflective. Dragging my hands down my face, I felt the rasp of stubble, the dampness of my skin. I realized over an hour had passed, consumed by that silent confrontation with potential selves, each desperate to sway my path, which, if any deserved trust, remained an agonizing unknown. My heart still hammered against my ribs. My chest felt tight, bruised. The sensation was akin to having run a great distance while standing perfectly still. With trembling hands, I draped the sheet over the mirror once more. The cloth settled, inert. I extinguished the lamp, gathered my keys. Pausing at the office door, I cast a final glance at the shrouded mirror, a part of me anticipating movement, some telltale bulge beneath the fabric. Nothing. I secured the office, then the main shop door, stepping out into the cool embrace of the early night. The sky arched, vast and indifferent. A welcome breeze touched my face. My shirt clung uncomfortably to my damp skin. The salty tang of dried sweat lingered on my lips. Climbing into my truck, I sat for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, my mind replaying the impossible tableau. It felt like possessing pieces from myriad jigsaw puzzles, none fitting together. Finally, the engine rumbled to life. I drove homeward through silent streets, the radio untouched. My fingers drummed an unconscious rhythm on the wheel, my gaze fixed ahead, but my thoughts remained tethered to the mirror. Would new reflections appear next time? Was I meant to choose amongst them, to cast a deciding vote in the fate of my own future? Their conflict felt visceral, intensely personal. Perhaps they required my intervention. Perhaps I had to select a path. Whether I possessed the will or the wisdom remained uncertain. What I did know was that discarding the mirror was no longer an option. Its pull, terrifying as it was, felt undeniable. That night found me seated on my couch in the darkness, body stiff, head throbbing. Switching on a lamp, I stared at the blank expanse of the opposite wall, attempting to corral my racing thoughts. A plan was needed, yet its shape eluded me. An impossible reality now resided in my possession. A flicker of perverse excitement sparked within the pervasive, chilling dread that had taken root in my chest. I resolved to return at dawn, to see if the mirror offered new revelations, if communication might somehow be established. Sleep, when it finally came after hours of tossing, was shallow and unrefreshing. I awoke to the familiar knot of anxiety tightening my gut, my limbs heavy, my neck stiff. Coffee was made, then abandoned half-drunk. I drove back to the shop. Entering the office, I removed the sheet, steeling myself for the silent fray. But this time, the surface remained stubbornly ordinary. My own tired eyes stared back. I leaned closer, waiting, hoping, fearing. Nothing shifted. A week has passed since that night. The mirror has offered no further glimpses into alternative lives, yet its presence is a constant low-level hum beneath my daily routine. Each time I pass the office door, an involuntary jolt runs through me, selling it, destroying it. Both feel like betrayals, or perhaps dangerous invitations. Those silent figures warring for my attention remain vivid in memory. I find myself wondering if they linger just beyond the veil of perception, waiting for another chance to break through. I've confided in no one. The tale borders on madness. Yet I've begun noticing unsettling resonances, small details echoing those reflections. A jacket in a shop window, unnervingly similar to the younger Silas's. A glimpse of a heavy gold ring on a stranger's hand. Now every decision, no matter how trivial, feels weighted. Does this choice lead toward the suited man's prosperity? Does that one veer toward the hardship signified by the cast? Which future is desirable or even avoidable? Am I meant to choose at all? The mirror has irrevocably altered my perception of my own life's trajectory. The feeling persists, unshakable, that at any moment the glass might shimmer, the reflections might surge forth again, jostling, pleading, demanding allegiance. And with that thought comes the familiar tension, a vice grip around my chest that offers no release. The mirror remains in my office, shrouded, patient, and I remain here, adrift in a sea of questions, clinging to the edge of the uncanny. Every morning, opening the shop, my ears strain, half expecting to hear the muffled sounds of a silent battle raging just beyond the office door. A knot cinched tight in my gut as I stepped into the echoing cavern of the auction house. My quest was simple, a new instrument, yet the air hummed with an unwelcome premonition. Dismissed violins, scarred and weary, lay scattered across a long table, supplicants awaiting judgment. Most bore the quiet desperation of needing profound restoration. Then, sequestered in a far corner, one caught the light strangely, not with polish or veneer, but with a deep internal luminescence beneath a surface marred by profound scratches. It possessed a sepulchral dullness, the patina of decades entombed in some forgotten attic. Against all reason, my gaze locked onto it, a magnetic pull I couldn't dissect. When the final call echoed, my hand shot up, volition overridden. I parted with far more currency than prudence allowed, departing with the enigma cradled in its case. Back in the sanctuary of my apartment, I liberated the violin, placing it upon my desk. An intense aroma wafted up, musty timber and rosin, yes, but amplified, almost aggressive compared to its brethren. The varnish spiderwebbed with fissures, The neck canted at a subtle, troubling angle. Curiosity overriding caution, I decided to test its voice, to see if the strings retained any memory of tension. With deliberate slowness, I coaxed each peg, the wood groaning in protest, sinews creaking like ancient joints. Eventually, a semblance of tune emerged. I drew the bow across the G-string. A rasping dissonance clawed at the silence, yet beneath it pulsed an unsettling resonance, a thrum that vibrated not just in the air but within my own bones, lingering long after the string fell quiet. Scales followed, tentative explorations up and down the fingerboard. The notes possessed a peculiar duality, hollow yet undeniably potent. It defied easy description, a sonic signature unlike any I had ever encountered. A tremor ran down my arms, involuntary and cold. That evening practice stretched into an hour, perhaps more. My shoulders radiated a dull ache born of tension, my heart hammering an erratic rhythm against my ribs. I yielded, returning the instrument to its case, seeking refuge in early sleep. But slumber was a fractured thing, brief, turbulent snatches punctuated by jarring visions, dust-choked corridors, gaslight sputtering in unseen drafts. I surfaced repeatedly, skin slick with sweat, dismissing the unease as buyer's remorse, the phantom cost of my impulsive acquisition. The following twilight found me setting up my music stand, sheet music arranged like a hopeful prayer. I sought a more thorough communion with the violin. A simple Baroque piece commenced, the notes peeling off the strings with an unnerving clarity. A faint spectral echo trailed each phrase, impossible within the confines of my modest apartment. Perhaps, I reasoned, some quirk in the ancient wood, some unique acoustic anomaly. I pressed on, concentrating fiercely on bow control, on precise intonation. Then a flicker danced at the edge of my vision. I paused, scanning the room. Silence. Emptiness. Shrugging off the prickle of unease, I resumed playing. Midway through the second movement, it happened again. A peripheral shimmer, a brief distortion of the air. The violin lowered, my chest constricted, breath shallowing into anxious sips. Every corner scrutinized, every shadow interrogated. The lamp on the side table pulsed, a single erratic blink. A clammy dread slicked my palms. No one. Yet the undeniable sensation of presence lingered, an invisible weight settling just behind my shoulder blades. Steeling myself, I changed tack, launching into a brighter, more vigorous tune, hoping to dispel the gathering shadows with forced cheer. Scarcely a minute had passed when I saw it. Near the threshold of the kitchen, an opalescent outline, vaguely human but devoid of color or substance. My bow stuttered against the string, the resulting note cracked, uncertain. And then, as swiftly as it appeared, the apparition dissolved. The violin hit the stand with a clatter. Heart pounding a frantic tattoo, I crossed to the kitchen doorway, hands trembling uncontrollably. One by one, I ignited every light source in the apartment, a desperate banishment ritual sweeping through each room. Alone. Utterly alone. Returning to the living room, I stood transfixed, staring at the instrument. My throat felt scraped raw. Questions swirled, a frantic vortex. Was my mind fraying? Exhaustion? A trick of the flickering lamplight? A scalding shower and the mindless drone of the television seemed the only recourse. Unease clung to me like damp wool upon waking. A rehearsal beckoned, a small chamber ensemble downtown, but the old violin remained behind. My familiar instrument felt blessedly mundane in my hands. Practice proceeded normally, yet my thoughts strayed, haunted by the memory of that translucent shape by the kitchen door. Had the violin somehow induced a hallucination? The moment rehearsal concluded, I hurried home, a knot of anxiety tightening with each step. Everything was undisturbed. I lifted the old violin from its case, the familiar tingle returning to my fingertips. I had to know. A few tentative notes, then the piece I'd played when the figure first materialized. As I navigated the more intricate passage, a palpable chill descended upon the room. My breath grew thin. Faint whispers curled at the edges of my hearing, indistinct syllables lost in the air. Suddenly, shapes bloomed throughout the room, multiple forms, ephemeral, translucent, drifting in slow concentric circles. Stunned into immobility, I continued playing, a captive audience to their silent ballet. They glided, swayed, turned in time with the music, their faces indistinct, mere suggestions of features within their luminous outlines, varying subtly in stature. The moment my bow stilled, they vanished. I stood rooted, breath tearing through my lungs, eyes fixed on the empty space they had occupied. The violin. It was the violin summoning them. Sweat traced cold paths down my spine, my shirt clinging damply. Terror warred with a perverse curiosity. I chose another piece, a simple memorized lullaby. Instantly the shapes reformed, their spectral dance resuming. This time a low resonant hum accompanied them, like wind sighing through a distant canyon. A minute passed before I stopped again. They dissolved. My body felt like a plucked string, vibrating with residual fear. Sinking onto the couch, the violin placed carefully beside me, I fought to regulate my breathing, the frantic hammering in my chest echoing the earlier music. This transcended explanation, defied logic. Yet the evidence was undeniable. The music birthed ghosts, and they seemed to yearn for its continuation. Sleep offered no respite that night, fragmented by the conviction that the violin played itself in the adjacent room. Each frantic investigation revealed only silence, the instrument inert in its case. Around 3 a.m, oblivion finally claimed me, only to plunge me into dreams of swirling shadows closing in. The morning alarm was a brutal intrusion, leaving me feeling scoured, depleted. Over the ensuing week, practice became ritual. Each session with the old violin conjured the apparitions. They swirled, initially keeping to the room's periphery, but growing bolder with each passing day. Soon they drifted closer, pressing near, their attention seemingly fixed on the dance of my bow, the vibrations humming through the wood. An icy nimbus surrounded them. Proximity raised gooseflesh on my arms, made the fine hairs on my neck prickle. My pulse surged, breath quickening, yet I played on, compelled by a force I couldn't name, as if the instrument itself demanded the performance. Then came the voices. A rain-lashed afternoon, the melody slow, steeped in melancholy. The phantoms materialized, forming a close circle. As the piece reached its mournful climax, whispers erupted, sibilant, urgent, in no language I recognized. They flooded my senses, a cacophony that nearly made me drop the bow. I stopped abruptly. Silence crashed down as they vanished. Later, seeking solace in a cheerful jig, they reappeared, their movements jerky, agitated. The whispers escalated into sharp, keening moans. Panic coiled in my gut. I ceased playing, setting the violin down, backing away. That's when the voice resonated, not in the room, but inside my skull. Clear, insistent, commanding me to play a specific melody. The understanding was instantaneous, terrifyingly direct, bypassing language, imprinted onto my consciousness by the violin's will. I tried to obey, my fingers fumbling on the fingerboard, attempting to recreate the sequence downloaded into my mind. It belonged to no known composition, a bizarre dissonant pattern. The notes squealed, protested. The ghosts flickered violently, like faulty projections. Again, I forced my fingers into unnatural contortions, generating sonic chaos. My shoulder locked, wrist screaming in protest. I pushed through the pain, driven by an unseen imperative, but the sequence defied mastery. My arm felt weighted with lead. Exhaustion finally forced a halt, my forearm twitching spasmodically. The ghosts dissolved, leaving me gasping on the couch. Days bled together, the alien sequence looping relentlessly in my thoughts. Each time I touched the violin, the internal command echoed, "Play." I attempted notation, but the intervals were grotesque leaps, defying musical logic. Hours vanished in futile practice. Phone calls went unanswered, meals forgotten. My body protested, stiffness, burning eyes, an aching spine. Yet the ghosts materialized faithfully, their presence intensifying, crowding me, forming a suffocating ring. The air grew thick, stale, heavy with the scent of damp plaster and decay. Time lost meaning. A glance at the clock might reveal 6 hours spent wrestling with that impossible music, fingers raw, muscles knotted. Cessation brought temporary relief, the ghosts fading, but their chill lingered, an invisible draft in the stagnant air. One afternoon my grip failed. The bow skittered across the floorboards. Chest heaving, ears ringing, I looked up into a vortex of swirling shapes pressing close. My trembling hand reached for the bow, fumbled, dropped it again. Knees buckling, I crawled towards it, snatched it up and launched into the simplest scale I knew. The phantoms retreated slightly but remained expectant. I reached my limit. My fingers were swollen, inflamed. A rash bloomed on my neck where the violin rested. Sleep was a distant memory, shattered nightly by the internal command, the cold certainty of being watched. Curtains rustled without breeze. The overhead light flickered with malevolent timing. My reflection stared back, gaunt, hollow-eyed, skin stretched pale over bone. Enough. I swaddled the violin in thick cloth, entombed it in its case, and shoved it deep into the closet, buried beneath old coats. For 2 days, blessed silence reigned. Then, on the third, faint scratching emanated from the closet, soft at first, like restless fabric, escalating to the distinct scrape of wood against lining. Inspections revealed nothing amiss. Yet the sound persisted intermittently, fraying my nerves, keeping me suspended in a state of perpetual low-grade terror. After a week of this siege, I capitulated. Retrieving the case, my hands tingled the moment they touched the cool exterior. The air around me dropped several degrees. I drew the violin out, resigned. A simple tune, hesitant notes filling the tense silence. The ghosts appeared, subtly changed, their forms gaining a fraction more solidity, hints of empty sockets and faint mouth lines emerging from the translucence. I played for mere minutes before the voice returned, implacable, demanding the sequence. Again I tried, forcing my fingers into the agonizing geometry of the notes. My wrist throbbed, but I pushed onward, desperate now to appease these spectral taskmasters. The music curdled the air, bizarre, unsettling. The bow grew impossibly heavy, my arm trembling violently. I managed perhaps half the sequence before my muscles seized completely. My bow hand spasmed, a cry of pure frustration tearing from my throat. A sharp, resonant thrum vibrated through the room, and the ghost surged inward as one. An Arctic wave washed over me, blurring my vision, stealing my breath. My heart hammered against my ribs with painful force. Thought fragmented. Not. Why? Not. Cursed. Only. Escape. Stumbling backward, I dropped the violin onto the couch and fled, slamming the bathroom door, locking it, pressing my back against the cool tiles, gulping air like a drowning woman. 15 minutes passed in terrified silence. Emerging cautiously, I found the living room empty. The violin lay innocuously on the couch, mute. A solution had to be found. Destruction felt too dangerous, invoking unknown reprisals. Selling it felt like knowingly passing on a contagion. So I wrapped it once more, returned it to its case and slid it beneath my bed. Now faint knocks and susurrant whispers drift up from below as I try to sleep, lights blazing defiantly against the dark. My nerves remain perpetually frayed. The impossible melody still echoes in the quiet moments, a phantom tinnitus. My hands remember the feel of those tortured chords. Peripheral flickers tease my vision, ghosts waiting in the wings. Resistance is a constant, exhausting effort against the insidious pull of the instrument, against the morbid desire to know, to play the sequence through, to witness the culmination. Yet terror holds me captive. For now, this tense truce holds. The violin remains hidden. The ghosts are quiescent, yet their presence is a palpable weight in the solitude. My body remains coiled, primed for flight. Explanations fail. Friends hear only excuses about fatigue, about feeling unwell. How to articulate this? The words sound like madness. So I sit, pulse throbbing in my temples, and wait, wondering when the whispers will begin anew, when the demand will become undeniable. Can I resist forever? Doubt gnaws. The violin under my bed is silent, but its power radiates, a siren call in the stillness. My heart seizes at the thought. Patience may be their virtue, or perhaps they are merely gathering strength. I know only this. They wait for the next note. This is my story, raw and unfinished. I am still living within its tightening grip. My business had drawn me north, deep into Michigan's sparsely populated upper reaches, to a hamlet named Iron Falls. It was the sort of place swallowed by forest, hushed and forgotten outside the brief frenzy of hunting season, a town where the street lights blinked off promptly at 8, surrendering the lanes to the pines and the darkness. The sole lodging available was a 3-story edifice whose glory days, if they ever existed, were now spectral memories etched in sagging eaves and faded paint. Threadbare runners snaked down dim corridors, wallpaper curled away from the plaster like sunburnt skin in certain corners, and a subterranean dampness, the ghost of long-ago leaks, clung stubbornly to the air. Still, it offered horizontal repose, and Elias Vance required little else. Check-in was a transaction steeped in muted disquiet. The woman behind the counter, whose name tag remained stubbornly obscured by shadow, slid the key across the worn formica with minimal preamble. Her attention was elsewhere, her eyes flicking, moth-like, towards the Stygian passage gaping behind her. The exchange concluded with unsettling swiftness, yet Elias, weary from the road, filed the strangeness away. Room, emails, oblivion. That was the itinerary. His assigned space was number 215, nestled on the second floor. He ascended stairs that groaned underfoot like ancient bones, each step echoing in the profound quiet. The door yielded, revealing the expected tableau: a bed, a scarred dresser, a meager desk huddled beneath a weak yellow bulb. The mattress possessed an air of reluctant serviceability. Elias tossed his satchel onto it, the thud swallowed instantly by the silence. He spent the ensuing hours tethered to his laptop, its low electronic drone the only counterpoint to the stillness. Outside, no engines murmured. Within, no footsteps passed. The quietude wasn't peaceful. It felt watchful, pressing leaching warmth from the room. An invisible scrutiny prickled the back of his neck. He scanned the room's shadowed corners, confirmed the deadbolt was thrown, and forced his attention back to the screen, dismissing the sensation as traveler's paranoia. Midnight arrived, signaling surrender. Elias stood at the bathroom basin, the overhead light stuttering erratically as he brushed his teeth. That's when he heard it. A subtle vibration in the air, a murmurous undertone leaking from somewhere within the wall. He froze, toothbrush suspended, straining to decipher it. The sound dissolved like smoke. Old plumbing, he reasoned, or perhaps the muffled television of a non-existent neighbor. He rinsed, killed the flickering light, and retreated to the bed. Darkness flooded the room, absolute and heavy. As sleep's gentle undertow began to pull him under, the sound returned. A low, susurrant voice, undeniably human yet indistinct, emanating from the plaster mere inches behind his headboard. Closer now, palpable. He sat bolt upright, pulse hammering against his ribs. "Hello?" The word emerged as a ragged whisper, absorbed by the waiting silence. Nothing. Just the building settling. He told himself fiercely. Just the wind sighing through the eaves, yet doubt, cold and sharp, pierced his logic. He slid from the sheets, pressing his ear flat against the cool, textured wallpaper. Silence again, profound and mocking. Elias crawled back beneath the covers, pulling them high, a flimsy bulwark against the mounting dread. He squeezed his eyes shut, commanding relaxation, but the certainty that something was fundamentally awry held him captive. Then came the knock, soft, tentative, barely disturbing the air, yet unmistakable. Tap, tap, tap. Somewhere down the hall. His breath hitched. He waited, every nerve alight. Silence resumed its reign. The bedside clock glowed. 2:03 a.m. A late arrival, perhaps, fumbling for their room. But the sound hadn't felt external. It had resonated oddly, seeming to originate from the structure itself, from within the wall's hollow cavities. He remained rigid, trying to quell the rising panic, assuring himself it was tricks of the ear in an old creaking hotel. But the quiet felt pregnant now, charged, as if something patient and unseen observed him from the periphery, waiting for his guard to drop. After an eternity suspended in watchful tension, he forced himself prone again. Deep breaths. An old building. An overactive imagination. He shut his eyes, seeking the refuge of unconsciousness. And then, a whisper of movement, a chill current caressing his cheek. His eyes flew open. The door to his room stood slightly ajar. He knew with unshakable certainty he had locked it, bolted it. Now, a dark sliver invited the hallway's deeper gloom inside, evidence of a presence that had come and gone. Trembling, Elias slipped out of bed and peered into the corridor. Empty. Silent. He secured the door once more, testing the lock, the deadbolt. Returning to bed felt like entering a cage. As he lay staring into the oppressive blackness, a new sound began. A faint, dry scraping, like something heavy being dragged across floorboards, originating from the adjacent room. He sat up, listening intently. The sound ceased as abruptly as it had begun. The wrongness intensified, settling deep in his bones. He rose, crossed to the shared wall, and rapped lightly. Knock. Knock. Silence answered. A desperate need for explanation, for normalcy, propelled him downstairs. Perhaps the night clerk could shed light, confirm occupancy next door, share a knowing glance about the building's eccentricities. The lobby, however, was deserted, bathed in the weak, indifferent glow of a single desk lamp. He waited, scanning the empty chairs, the shadowed corners. No one appeared. "Hello?" he called out, his voice swallowed by the cavernous space. He was turning to leave, defeated, when his gaze fell upon the counter. An open ledger lay there. A guest register? No. Closer inspection revealed architectural diagrams, floor plans of the hotel. Curiosity overriding caution, Elias leaned in. Floor by floor, room by numbered room. His eyes traced the layout of the second floor. He found 213. He found 217. But between them, where 215 should have been, the diagram showed only an uninterrupted line, a solid wall. His room wasn't mislabeled. According to this plan, his room did not exist. A glacial coldness seeped into him, independent of the night air. His mind struggled to reconcile the map with the key in his pocket, the bed he'd just left. He scanned the diagram again, frantically seeking an error, an annex, a forgotten wing. Nothing. The blueprint was unequivocal. Where Elias Vance had spent the last several hours, there was only plaster and void. He backed away from the desk, a dizzying sense of unreality washing over him. Was this a dream? A prank? Or had he somehow slipped through a crack in the world? He spun around, the need to confirm, to see, overwhelming his fear. He took the stairs back up, his footsteps loud in the unnatural hush. The second-floor corridor seemed subtly altered, the shadows deeper, the perspective somehow skewed, as if the walls themselves were inhaling. He paced slowly, deliberately, counting the doors, his heart thudding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. 207, 213, then nothing. Just a seamless expanse of faded patterned wallpaper where the door to 215 had been only moments before. He stood frozen, staring at the blank wall, the reality of it crashing down on him. Reaching out a trembling hand, he touched the surface. It was cool, solid, indisputably real, and utterly featureless. Then from the air directly behind him, so close it might have been breathed onto his neck, came a faint sibilant whisper. Elias whirled around, finding only empty, lengthening shadows. A strangled cry escaped him. He stumbled backward, turned and fled. Down the hallway, down the groaning stairs, bursting out into the cold, indifferent night. He didn't pause, didn't look back, until he reached the sanctuary of his car, fumbling violently for the keys. The engine roared to life, and he sped away from the hotel, away from Iron Falls, the inexplicable terror a burning brand on his mind. What transpired in that impossible room, whether a figment of exhaustion or a glimpse into a place outside of reason, he couldn't fathom. He knew only one thing with chilling certainty. He would never return.